Welcome to the podcast. Nathan Newberry here, your host. I got a special guest, Zach Terry, on our call today. He is a pastor. He is a radio host. He has his own podcast. He has a really unique story being trapped in Israel, has an amazing family. He's doing some series on marriage and family. He's in Florida. And he has some wild upbringing and some, really interesting things about life and in business that we're going to talk about today. So wait toward the end. We're going to really kind of touch on a lot more tactical things that I think will be really helpful as an entrepreneur for you as you're growing and scaling that Pastor Zach is going to touch on a lot more today. Zach, as we dive into, our series here today, I want the guests to kind of understand a little bit more about, what you do, how you serve people. And so they get some context there. And then I got another question I want to hit you with.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. And it's exciting knowing your background and the people that are listening, the people that want to make their life count. And, coming from a church background, a pastoral background, that's really what we do. We're coaches and we're wanting to help people mine out their gifts and talents and abilities and to use them for something of eternal purpose. And so I'm a pastor of a large church in North Florida. It's large for us. We're somewhere between 12 and 1,300 attendance, but it's in this part of the state. That's a large church. It's got a great media presence. So we have radio ministry up and down the East Coast and on Christian stations, talk radio stations, that sort of thing. We live in a day where you can live anywhere on the planet and literally reach the world. And so that's what we're passionate about and what we hope to do.
Amazing. What is high performance? What does that look like to you with all of your past experiences? What leading up to, your success now? What does that look like?
In my mind, I think of the parable of the talents, where Christ said that each person is given a number of talents and he's to leverage those, to use those for eternal purposes so that the ultimate owner, the one who gave the talent, is proud of it. He's happy about it. Mm-hmm. And so high performance in my mind would be ending life and getting that well done, that I maximized everything that I could with what I've been given. And it may not be anywhere close to what you're capable of, but I want to reach my personal potential for the glory of God.
Man, before this call today, life is sometimes heavy, right? And you're like, tons of things just start stacking up and kind of weighs on you emotionally and draining you, right? And I kind of looked at it, and I want to get your take on this, is like looking at what does like success look like? What does winning look like? I just really looked at the granular level, and I was like, my relationship with Jesus, walking in the Spirit, that's really important, right? Because if I'm not doing that, I'm not setting myself up for success, for any sort of legacy or the future. My relationship with my wife, my kids, the impact I want to give. And if I reverse those, then I can get in trouble pretty easily. Right.
So true. And I think most of us, because we're made in God's image, not most of us, I think every person that God has created has potential far beyond what most of us are tapping into. I had a gentleman, he would be a good guest on your program. He's actually from the West Coast, but I'll tell you how his name is Dan Dumas.
Okay.
Dan is the guy that they called in when Kanye made his profession of faith. So this was a guy, how do you take Kanye and get him discipled out of the bad stuff toward the good stuff? And I don't know how successful he was with Kanye, but Dan is a very special individual. And so he invited me into a program of kind of high performance leaders. And I said, Dan, I would love to do it. I just don't think I have time. I'm very, very busy and I don't think I have time. And he said, that's where we disagree. We believe that if you feel like you're maxed out, you've probably hit maybe 70% of what you're capable of. We think there's another 30% that you don't know about. And our job is to help you identify that and reach your potential, that God's given you. And so, man, that's what I want to in turn do for my people.
Yeah. Bring us back to the origin story, Zach, of like the very beginning of like what got you into ministry. Your dad was a very successful guy in business. Like what lead you into that, leading up to the success you have now?
And this where I'm from in North Alabama, was born and raised. Dad was a construction worker. He was an insulator, and he laid asbestos before they knew how dangerous that product could be. So in 83, 84, kind of hit the news and the media that this stuff could kill you. And so all of the insulators were laid off. And there was a period of like 5 or 6 months where they had to make ends meet. And so my mother had just started a little family business down the street from our house. And it was a florist and gift shop. And that's what she had worked in high school. That's what she knew, but she knew the creative side. She didn't know the business side. Dad was somewhat of a sales and mathematical savant. He dropped out of high school in 11th grade, but dad's one of these guys that you can throw, 5, 6 digit numbers and he could calculate, add, subtract, multiply without a pen or paper, and incredibly accurate. And he had a knack for selling. He had worked in a car lot, got all the awards for top sales before he was an insulator. So dad hung around my mom's florist, and he just instinctively, he said, it's your business, but if you would let me, I think I can buy wholesale cheaper, buy in bulk. I think we can increase the margin in our products and do a little advertising. I think you've got a niche here that we could really exploit. And so mother kind of turned the business over to him. Dad, this high school dropout, construction worker, built that business up to being the largest florist of its type in the Southeast. And coming from a pastoral background, this is not something we brag about, but it'll give you an idea of how successful he was. He was Hugh Hefner's personal florist. So Hugh bought a lot of flowers. Okay. So we had Christmas cards from the mansion every year, So he was incredibly successful. The governor, the state of Alabama, he would decorate the governor's mansion at Christmas. But I saw dad go from literally a single wide trailer to his dream home, paid for any car he wanted to drive. And at the same time, I was able to walk with the Lord, keep me in church, point me toward Christ. And, coming into ministry, I noticed early that something churches were not good at was reaching men like my father. So part of what I wanted to do was to equip pastors to reach guys like my dad who just had an odd fit when it came to, they felt used a lot of times. And so that's a lot of what I've worked and written about and what we've been successful at here in Florida.
Well, so you wrote your dissertation about that, but doing ministry outside of entrepreneurship is like, it's a calling, right? What clicked though for you way back when you're like, I got to do ministry. I got to preach the gospel. I got to do that. What was
It was an undeniable, irresistible compulsion.
Yeah.
I came to Christ at 18 as a freshman in college. About a year later, I was actually heading toward the entertainment industry. We basically had a band, a country band. We're about an hour and a half from Nashville. And so we had a decent chance of going up there. In fact, my son is doing that now. He signed with Sony Records, Cole Terry, if anybody wants to look him up, but Cole Terry Music. But that was my dream. That's what I was doing. And then, came to Christ. It couldn't get enough of teaching and truth. And one day it just started sensing that calling that, hey, you're supposed to do this. And that lasted probably for 3 months of wrestling through it, praying through it, until it became the kind of thing that I felt as if almost, even though it was a free will choice, it was almost like, buddy, that's what I put you there for. I can't use you for a lot else. You need to obey me in this. And so that's what at 30 years I've been in ministry now.
What got you into doing like the radio thing then?
I
Because
came to
that's a unique spin, right? Like
Yeah.
you're doing pastoral things, preaching the word, counseling people, talking with people. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm a radio host. You're a podcast host. You've written books. How do you find
That's
time?
a couple of
Where's your
different
focus in?
things. And came to Christ through radio. So was minding my own business, trying to find a song on the radio back in 94, and came across a radio preacher. And I wasn't interested. I had no desire to know more. But I'd grown up in a church where it was in the Appalachian foothills, where our pastors screamed and yelled a lot as they preached. So I literally thought it was the news. It was Charles Stanley,
Okay.
Andy Stanley's
Yeah.
father. But Charles was conversational in his approach. So I stopped thinking it was the news. And he talked about Christ. He explained the gospel, and it just haunted me for the rest of the day. I went through drop ad, dropped every class I had before noon, and was sitting in my car listening to radio preachers. So that discipled me, that brought me to the Lord. And I knew how to do it because that my major in college was entertainment industry management. And so we knew studio work. We understood how to produce a show. And it's just like we kind of began. If it's something that you're able to do and God's gifted you to do it, there's a stewardship there.
Mhm.
So, and the strange thing that would surprise most people about radio is like when satellite television came out or YouTube TV, that sort of thing, terrestrial antenna television and cable kind of started tanking. That didn't happen with radio. It's not growing, but it's kept its market share. The only thing in radio that's grown surprisingly is AM. So the talk format on AM is actually growing and reaching more people. So surprisingly, we've done better in AM than we have FM. And so I don't know that we'll do it forever. We may pivot to television at some point. We're geared up, building the infrastructure for that. But for now, it's working and it's paying for itself. We're reaching new people. So as long as those doors are open and we're able to pay for it, it's kind of something we're going.
Let me ask you this. High achievers, they have this impregnable drive that most people don't understand. Right. And it's driven sometimes, and we see some extremes on this right? Throughout like history. You see Rockefeller or, even Steve Jobs leading up to now, where it's just like Steve Jobs, his health deteriorated, his family did, his kids. It was from just the drive that they had that was just unshakable. Right. And I've seen this in a lot of high performers, even pastors, where they're driven for the ministry or the focus or the drive. Where do you think the balance is for like you and I that are just driven for impact, we're driven for success, just internal wiring, just the way that we're built and wired for it. Like, how can we impact? How can we grow? We look at angles and differences a little bit different because we're visionaries than just, many people that are just working. And the twist on this too is, how do you have a relationship with a spouse, kids that doesn't be ruined by those internal drives that we have that are really kind of God gifts, but need to be stewarded in the right way?
Well, I've heard it said that true balance is an illusion. So you're always correcting, you're always managing that balance. So we just returned from a month-long sabbatical, took the month of July, and went down to Roatan Island and rented a home and just stayed there. And I woke up in the morning and I would draw and paint. It's a hobby of mine. And it's therapeutic. I may produce like 2 works a year. I did probably 6 or 7 while I was on sabbatical. And then we would go snorkeling. My wife has a photography background. She bought an underwater setup for a camera, and we would snorkel and make pictures. But even that, it's to relax, but we're looking at it almost like it's a business. Like, how do we get the best picture we can get? How do I paint something that I want to put in my living room? And that part of nature, that part of my nature, your nature, I don't squelch that. That's just how I don't understand people who don't approach it that way. But, and my wife, we started out early on. A pastor said 4 Ds: dialogue daily, date weekly, depart quarterly, deport annually. So that's been like part of that's the other 4 commandments for us.
Describe those a little bit more.
Before this show, we had lunch together, Julie and I. Every Friday, it's marked off on my calendar, that's date night. We dialogue daily. We have at least 1 meal together every day. We date weekly, and the church knows it. If you invite me to a Friday night event, unless I can really swap a night and make it work, I'm probably going to say no. Dialogue daily, date weekly, depart quarterly. And so this will be a baseball game. This will be a play that she's been wanting to watch, but an overnight 2 or 3 night trip somewhere, and then annually deport. And that's the longer stays, the week, 2 weeks, or a month, to just really focus on each other and keep that relationship tight and where it's supposed to be.
I think that's cool.
Those rhythms. And we have something similar with our kids. We shoot for about 3, and our kids are 17, 21, and 23. So it's harder at those ages, but we shoot for 2 or 3 family meals a week. everybody at the table, no tech. And probably the best advice I was ever given is have one conversation at a time. Dad can lead it, mom can lead it. A kid may bring something to the table, but rather than like the two girls talking, me and my son talking, um, it's one conversation. And it served us really, really well, over we celebrated 25 years of marriage this year.
Amazing.
During that time, it served us well.
You're going through a series right now. And even these tactical approaches that you're talking right now, I think are really good for anybody listening in. Is like your relationship with God is important. How we kind of look at that. I know for me, I anchor that at the beginning of my day, but then also like prioritizing, put it on your calendar. I remember hearing someone say, it's like, hey, I can see your priorities if in like 5 minutes if I see your calendar and bank account, because you're able to kind of gauge where you're prioritizing your calendar and your time throughout the day and week, as well as like your finances toward being intentional, those points too. And I think those are really good touch points, like you're talking about. And I love the tactical steps. And I'm going to take away some of those things today for sure. What are some things that you're teaching through the Bible that you're seeing as well that's people need to recognize in their priority with the relationships with God or either spouse
Well,
or kids?
it we try to approach scripture in a sense that not to make it practical, but assume that it is. And so, for example, this past week, we're preaching through Genesis, and we were in chapter like 8 and 9 when Noah's getting off the boat after over a year, 371 days on that ark. He's getting off. And then so we took the introduction was long, but it was trying to imagine the trauma that he experienced, seeing everything that he knew wiped off the face of the earth. He gets off the boat and everything has changed. And so whether it's the loss of a marriage, it's someone returning from, combat, a business that didn't work out, we all go through those things in life. And looking at the first thing he did, the first thing he built was an altar, and he pursued worship. And so last week, we just try to look for things like that are very, very practical, very textual, but next we're going to see the passage that nobody preaches, the one where he's drunk, naked in a cave, right? Because he was human. He was a real guy, and he didn't always respond the right way. And the God who rescued and saved him is a God that knew what he was going to do in that cave. And so we just assume that, God called real people and the stories are about real people, and we try to approach it that way. And so somebody asked one time, we'll do things like a family series, but in a sense, every sermon is about the family. We'll do giving series, but stewardship comes up in every sermon. And so those key parts of life that we all have to figure out how to do, we try to mine those out of every text that we walk through.
Mm. Well, I want to ask you your experience. You were in Israel during a pretty wild time. Like, talk to us through some of that.
So yeah, we were on a tour. Do every other year we do a trip to Israel. We'll take anywhere from 45 to 55 people. I think there were 54 on that trip. We had, and they're typically people who are leaders. It's an expensive trip to go on. So you're talking, $7,500 for about a 10 to 14 day tour. They're leaders typically within our community or a radio audience. So we didn't know, we don't ask, what do you do for a living until we have a personal kind of connection with them. But we didn't realize we had a 2-star general on the trip. We had a nuclear physicist on the trip. We had a state senator from Georgia that was on the trip. So while we're there was during the time when the attack happened from Hamas. And so we started getting calls from the State Department saying, hey, you need to listen to us. We're going to try to keep you safe and get you through this, but you've got some high value targets. And we don't know what's going on over there, where this is going to lead. And so, I'm talking on the phone to a lady at the State Department. I'm saying, ma'am, right now we're at the corner of, she said, sir, we know exactly where you're at. We need every phone in your group, and we're tracking everywhere you guys go, which was comforting. Normally that would be scary, but this was comforting. So I'm preaching. As soon as it happened, we were in Galilee. We traveled from Galilee to Jerusalem because that's where we had a hotel reserved. And I walk out on my patio that night, third floor, third story of the hotel, and I hear automatic weapons. And, in the States, we don't think about that. And so literally I'm up there going, that was a machine gun. I probably should go inside, go in, turn the lights out, close the curtains. We don't think that way. It was so surreal. And then the next day, we had part of our tour was to go up to the Mount of Olives. And you stand on the Mount of Olives and you read Matthew 24, and you're overlooking the city. And I'm standing there because if you don't give these people something to do, they're just going to turn inward and anxiety is going to grow and all of that. And so it was safe enough for us to do that. We go out to the park. I'm reading the Mount of Olives, the Matthew 24, and over the horizon, you see the smoke rising over Gaza, where Israel was responding. And the reality of everything I'm reading is like it's unfolding right before my eyes.
Yeah.
Part of the deal was getting home. We had to figure out how to get home. And we began getting calls from media outlets, NBC News, Extra, Fox, you name it. They were calling, doing videos like this. And we chose to do those because we felt like it would create a little bit of momentum that may lead to getting us out of there, because you couldn't get a flight, you couldn't get a boat, you couldn't leave. Everything was shut down. And sure enough, we were able to go through the Jordanian border, and we were able to fly out of Amman and get home. This took us, I think the trip was supposed to be 14 days, and it ended up being like 19 or 20 that we were stuck over there.
That's wild that you had those guys on your, tour, but didn't even know those
No,
levels of, people and
no.
their.
And I knew the senator. The senator let it be known that he was a senator. But the other guys, I'm like, so you're a 2-star general. Were you going to mention that? And most guys, I'm sure you found it to be true. Most high achievers, they're not waving the flag of success.
Mhm.
They're pretty humble about it from my experience. But yeah, he just kind of chuckled and he said, yeah, amazing what he knew about what was going on. He said, yeah, everybody told me I probably shouldn't come on this trip, but I didn't know if I'd get to do it again.
Right. That's wild. And so going through Jordan, I used to live over there
Really?
for a while, so I know all the ins and outs of what you're talking about. It's Galilee is one of my favorite spots. It took me 3 days, but I walked around it,
Wow.
and I just slept on the beach and read the Gospel of John while I did that, which was pretty cool experience. And then I had spent some time in Jordan too. We were helping people get help with people in the Middle East at one point, just experiencing and seeing what the operations they had, but they were helping people get like little kids needing surgeries that weren't really public and stuff like that. But
Yeah, that's
it was really
awesome.
cool
Well,
to kind of see some of that.
where the museum is that they have the Jesus boat
Yeah.
there on the Sea of Galilee? That's where we were at. We were out on one of the boats. We came back to the docks. We were about to go into the museum, and that's where we were when we got news. It was on social media. So back home, everybody's asleep. And we knew when they wake up, they're going to be worried about us. And so we shot a video letting everybody know we were okay. And we just started calling. We have a US congressman who's in our church. And so we called him and said, hey, can we find a flight? Is there any strings you can pull? And long story short, the tour director, the man who owned the tour company, really made it happen. Uh, just a interesting leadership kind of moment that happened. We were on a conference call with this guy named Tony, who's very connected, very successful in that industry. And Tony said, look, Pastor, we can get you and your wife out tomorrow, but everybody else is going to take a few days for us to get them out. And I said, Tony, I can't do that. We will go out last. So, we can put maybe a young mother, whoever, but we go last. And he said, that's what I wanted to hear. We'll have you out within a couple of days, the whole group. So cost them tens of thousands of dollars to secure those flights, but they made it happen and they got us home. So Signature Tours, I give them a big shout out.
Yeah. Love that. I love that. And so bringing us back to kind of the overall high achieving stuff, I want to get some tips, some tricks of like how to have, strong organization. What are some things there? Was it organization? Is it having team players? What is it at home? What does that look like with strong tactics? And, and then your radio and the companies that you have and you're running there. Give us some like insights of some things that you've discovered tactically that's helped you kind of grow into the level of success that you have now?
Well, when it comes to the priority, the main understanding, what is your main product? What is the thing that you're selling, so to speak? And I was raised by an entrepreneur, so I think in those terms. And depending on if it's a minister, depending on who the minister is, it's going to be a little different. My superpower is in the communication and in the delivery of the sermon or the content. So I started and probably learned this from John Maxwell 30 years ago. When I started ministry, I heard him say, write down and create the best filing system you can possibly create. And so it was, we were online by then. We had computers, and I would, the first sermon I ever wrote, I've still got those notes and I could bring them up for you. Everything that I studied, which is countless hours, seminary, I created a filing system. So if I'm in Genesis 8 and it's filed exposition in the book of Genesis, then chapter 8, there's that document. It's copied and it's filed also maybe in like trauma response into a topical folder. In as many places as I can put it where it might come up again, I'm going to file that. And so I haven't counted recently, but thousands and thousands of outlines and notes. I write everything out, almost a transcript that I preach. So now I write my Sunday sermon on Saturday morning because I don't have to work through the theology anymore. Done that hard work. I'm not shifting in that area. I've preached through so much of the Bible. If you've preached through Ephesians, then you've got most of Colossians already done. They're almost carbon copies. That work, which was not easy, but that work of creating good files and structure now is paying dividends because I can crank out content much quicker, ethically using AI. So if I have the introduction written out for my sermon, to give you an example, this Sunday at Genesis 8, Noah's getting off the ark. I've written this introduction out that kind of lets you feel what he's feeling. And I think to myself, who would I like to hear tell this story? It seemed to me that this would be really cool to hear Josh Brolin tell that story. Josh Brolin, Thanos, that voice. And so I asked ChatGPT, take this and give it back to me in the tone of Josh Brolin. It made it amazing. So, ethically just looking for ways, you doing the hard work, but letting it help you in some things. We've found that incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So between the hard work of filing and then as technology gives us some help along the way, hopefully it makes something that really helps people.
Amazing. Zach, how can people follow you and connect with you further?
ZachTerry.com, ZachTerry.com. They can find everything there. Probably our biggest presence on social media is just at Zach Terry. But most of our content is going to be on YouTube. That's the easiest place to interact. Substack, for whatever reason, I write a lot on Substack and it's taken off. And so if they can go to our website, find our Substack that way. But that's been fun. I didn't know Substack was rocking now, but it's really taken off and people are engaging there. And that's to us, we would rather have 100 people that are engaging with us rather than 1,000 that just kind of read occasionally or listen. And so that's what we kind of migrate toward is those high engagement social medias.
I'll put those links down below so people can reach out to you and follow you. Thank you so much for being on. Everybody that's listening and tuning in on this episode, we appreciate you connecting with us, listening up to this point. If you are wanting to build an online presence, make sure to reach out to me, as well as we have a free workshop down below that's going to help you know how to be able to leverage building a media team, leverage AI, build some sales teams that's going to allow you to grow and scale online. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.